already attacking Iran. I mean, Israel's plainly behind the assassinations and the sabotage, and I don't quite say so, but open admission. In fact, some high U.S. official recently asserted that the Israeli Mossad, their CIA, basically is using Iranian terrorist groups designated by the U.S. as terrorist groups to carry out assassinations inside Iran. The only question is, will it go up to a direct military attack? Well, Israel is trying very hard to get the United States to attack Iran. That's obviously what they would prefer. So far, the U.S. is backing off. It looks as though U.S. military intelligence don't want to get involved with a bombing of Iran. Would have all kind of, not out of any love for Iranians, but they're afraid of the consequences. Israel might do it themselves, can't tell. If they got a clear order from the United States not to do it, then they wouldn't. But if it's what's sometimes called a yellow light, we don't say yes, but we don't say no, then they might. And in fact, it could be within the next few months. Their line is that if they wait a couple more months, Iran will be able to make the nuclear enrichment facilities impregnable. I don't have any idea whether this is true or here, but anyway, that's the line that they're using. It's kind of interesting. What's interesting, and I think we should consider carefully, is the general assumption here that it's only a question of what the costs would be. So, in other words, if we could do it without cost, it would be the right thing to do. That's kind of almost across the spectrum. But maybe it's too costly for us. The sanctions are basically an act of war. They, in fact, if actually there was a group of NATO generals recently, a year or two ago, issued a long statement about what would constitute acts of war that would entitle the United States to, in fact, even use first use of nuclear weapons. And one of them was manipulation of the financial system. Well, what we're doing is cutting Iran off from from the global financial system. And we're doing it by putting pressure on other countries. So the most recent and important was to get Belgium which runs the international telecommunication system for banks, to essentially cut out Iran. This is essentially an act of war. The sanctions are having the predicted effect. They're harming the population. You can read articles, New York Times explaining kind of upbeat articles saying that the sanctions working, that people don't have bread, they're starving, they can't bring food into the country, it's great. That's what sanctions do. Sanctions in Iraq were the same. The two international diplomats, respective international diplomats who administered the oil for food program, that was supposed to be the generous part of the sanctions. They both resigned, charging it was genocidal. And they were essentially cut out of the U.S. media. Couldn't comment. But sure, that's what sanctions do. We've had 50 years of embargo against Cuba. It seriously harms the population. That's the point. In fact, if you look back to the origins of the sanctions in the Kennedy years, high officials just said straight out, if we can make the population suffer, then maybe they'll overthrow the government. What makes Iran a threat? Try to find some discussion of that. Actually, there is discussion. There's even an authoritative answer. but it's not reported and discussed. It comes from the Pentagon and the U.S. intelligence agencies in their annual presentations to Congress on the global security system. They, of course, talk about Iran, and they review the Iranian threat and take it very seriously. But we can learn a lot about ourselves by seeing what the threat is. The threat is basically deterrence. They might deter U.S. actions, and that's intolerable if you own the world and have to be free to do anything you want anywhere in the world. They don't think that Iran has the capacity to deploy force and say, no, of course it doesn't. And I don't think any strategic analyst in his right mind thinks that even if Iran had nuclear weapons, that they'd use them in a first strike. The country would be vaporized. It's not politics as usual. These guys are off the spectrum. If you get outside the United States, people are watching this with amazement. It's as if it's a freak show, a lunatic is on it. So it's not at all politics as usual. I mean, I can't recall a time when there was anything, it wasn't anyone who even was in the real world. I mean, probably Romney would be if he didn't have to appeal to the Republican base. But what's actually happened over the years, whatever these guys may think in their heads, years ago the Republican Party basically abandoned any pretense of being a normal political party. They're just dedicated, passionately to service to the very rich and to the corporate sector, period. They have a kind of catechism that you have to repeat, kind of like makes the old Communist Party look like a free institution, and everyone has to repeat it. Well, you can't get votes that way. So if you want votes, you're forced to turn to sectors of the population that have always been there, but were never mobilized as a political force. For one thing, it's an unusually religious country. By international standards, it's an extremist religious country. So that sector of the population can be mobilized. There is a nativist element, always has been, driven by fear, everything. Maybe the UN's coming, maybe aliens, whatever it is. This is now buttressed by the fact that the white working class has really taken it in the chin for 30, 40 years. The Democrats pretty much abandoned them, paid attention to the white working class. And they're bitter. They also sense correctly that they're losing their country. Not only are they losing their jobs and their lives, but it's not going to be a white country in 50 years, or maybe less. And so they're extremely bitter. Well, they can be mobilized. Racist groups can be mobilized. The sort of petty bourgeoisie, the insurance salesmen, the car salesmen, these people, they don't like government regulation. It bothers them. I mean, I remember years ago when they were trying to bar lead paint, painting contractors were really upset. They said it's the only paint that works, and destroy our businesses. You ask, well, what about the effects? It's all scientists, why don't I trust them, So you've got those sectors. And if you want to appeal to those sectors, you have to be pretty crazy. So if you watch, frankly don't watch the debates against Senate, but I read about them, and if you see what's going on, the most frightening aspect of it, I think, is the audience response. The most shocking statements get huge applause. And if anyone by accident says anything semi-humane, they have to back down and apologize for it. Popularity drops and so on. So it's not politics as usual. And there's nobody there, at least the way they present them. I don't know what they are somewhere else, but the way they present themselves, it's a disaster for the world. And some of the things they've done I thought were pretty good. Like, for example, when the government tried to prevent any Wikipedia funding, Anonymous went after the big sites, Amazon, Google, kind of shut them down. Good move, I thought.
Yeah.
But and there are other things that I thought were good. I mean, going after people's email, I particularly like. Kind of like the questions that came up all the time during the resistance movement back in the 60s. I was very much involved in it. But you have to decide, you know, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, what's legitimate, what isn't, what are the consequences, and so on. It has to some extent. That's why, you know, authoritarian regimes keep closing it, trying to close it down. Egypt, China, you know, sure, it's the main way in which organizing and activism gets off the ground. That's also a technique of marginalization control. Like, you know, any kind of technology, you can use it for liberation, you can use it for repression, like the drones you were mentioning. In principle, you could use them to help firefighters, or you could use them for surveillance. Depending on the structure of power, it will be one or the other. Not really. I mean, it's certainly a different system, but if you go back 50 years, anybody could print stuff in their living room and distribute it in the streets too. I mean, this way it reaches more people, but it's a question how much it means. I mean, if you know what you're looking for, the internet's extremely valuable. If you don't know what you're looking for, it's about as valuable as walking into the Library of Congress and saying, I want to be a physicist. It's just a mass of meaningless data.